"Today's the day," Javon Myr muttered under his breath, his hand tightening around the worn metal railing of the observation deck. His gaze locked on the cold, alien expanse of space outside the window. He could almost feel the darkness pressing in, its weight suffocating, though not in the way it should. No, this wasn't just the void of space. Something else lingered in the air, as if a storm was coming. A storm no one was prepared for. The plasma display in front of him flickered, its sharp, crackling lights dancing across his fingers, tracing faint patterns in the air. He scanned the screen, his eyes narrowing. The readings were off, subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in the electromagnetic field. It wasn't just a glitch, but an anomaly, one he had hoped to never see. A low, almost guttural voice came through his earpiece. "Javon, you see these numbers?" Captain Ayla Sorek's voice cut through the quiet, sharp, and professional. "What the hell is this?" "Anomalies," Javon replied, his voice low but firm. He wasn't asking for confirmation. He didn't need it. He could already tell it wasn't something natural. The readings, tiny fluctuations in the planet's gravitational pull, were a warning, something that hadn't been there yesterday, nor the day before. Something's out there, something big. Ayla's tone shifted to urgency. "No one's detected anything like this before. Whatever it is, it's not human-made." Javon straightened, the faint taste of metal rising in his mouth. His mind raced back to what he had been told years ago, the whispers about the Galactic Empire, the stories from those who had survived its wrath. Earth was too far beneath the radar for anyone to bother with, too insignificant. But now, as he stood there staring at the endless black, the familiar sense of dread crept into his gut. "Send this data to the team," he snapped, turning sharply. "Get them in the command center, now." His boots clanged softly against the cold metallic floors as he strode down the narrow corridor. The station was alive, the low hum of machinery vibrating through the walls, but the steady beat of his heart drowned out everything else. The air was thick with tension, his breath too sharp, too loud. This wasn't a routine check, not anymore. The command center was bustling, an energy in the air that had nothing to do with the system's normal operations. Crew members scurried from station to station, their eyes glued to their heads-up displays, fingers flying over their touchpads. The room buzzed with the soft clicking of keys, the electronic pulse of commands filtering through their communication grid. Every now and then, one of them would glance up, their expressions unreadable, eyes flickering to the large central display where the data from Javon's station was feeding in. Javon's footsteps echoed louder than the rest. When he entered, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Without a word, he approached the control panel, his eyes still locked on the laser plasma display, where the blinking anomaly had already begun to spread. "Status?" he demanded, his voice cool but underlined with urgency. Ayla Sorek appeared from the far side of the room, her face pale, eyes sharp. "We're not getting anything from our surveillance satellites. They should be detecting any anomalies within our radius, but—" She paused, fingers hovering over her display. "This thing, whatever it is, it's beyond the range of anything we've encountered, and it's moving toward us." Javon didn't flinch, though every instinct told him to. "How far?" "2 weeks," Ayla replied, a chill in her voice. The room collectively took in a breath. 2 weeks. It wasn't enough time to prepare, but it wasn't impossible either. Not with the kind of resources they had left. The ones they had hidden, the ones no one even knew about. "Who are we dealing with?" Javon asked, his eyes still scanning the feed, willing the screen to tell him something more. But there was nothing. Only those damn readings, growing larger by the second. "Unknown," came the response from Oren Voss, Earth's top strategist, who was leaning over his console, fingers tapping nervously. "But whoever it is, they know we're here." "What do you mean by that?" Javon demanded, his gaze snapping to Oren. Oren's voice softened. "The Empire, the legends, they're real, Javon. And if they found us—" He let the rest of the words hang in the air, unspoken but understood by everyone in the room. Javon closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of Oren's words sinking into his bones like the cold of space. Then we don't have 2 weeks, he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. We have 2 days. Outside, the stars were too still. The vastness of space stretched before him, and yet it felt smaller than ever. The Empire was coming. Earth had no idea how prepared they were for this fight. No idea that the game had already started. The moment their sensors had gone dark, when humanity had been lulled into believing they were safe, that's when the real enemy had been watching, gathering strength. Javon turned to Ayla, his voice steely. We'll need all the data you can get, not just from the satellites, but from the old archives. Start combing through everything. Every fragment of technology we've borrowed over the years. I want everything. We're not just fighting an enemy. We're fighting history. She met his gaze with a flicker of understanding. It's time to dust off the ruins, then. Javon didn't smile, but there was a spark in his eyes, a recognition that this was their last stand, humanity's last chance. Make it count. As the room came alive again, Javon's mind raced ahead, constructing plans in silence. The Empire had underestimated humanity. That was their first mistake, but they wouldn't make it again. A quiet beep interrupted his thoughts. Vela Nasra, the intelligence officer, spoke from her corner of the room, her voice steady but full of weight. The signals, those patterns, they match what we've seen before. The Empire's fleet isn't just an invasion force. It's a message. They think we'll bend. Javon's eyes locked onto the data. For the first time, a flicker of satisfaction crossed his face. Then we'll send a message right back. The tension in the command center hung like a thick fog. Javon Myr's pulse still raced from the fleeting moment of realization. The Empire was coming. The vastness of space was no longer silent and distant. It was an ever-looming threat. The room's low, persistent buzz seemed to fade into the background as the data stream continued to flash across the laser plasma displays. Earth's future was unraveling in real time, but Javon's mind was already ahead of the curve. You've run the simulations twice, Javon's voice cut through the murmur of the team, his gaze never leaving the screen. The numbers blinked like an emergency signal, growing sharper and more urgent with each passing moment. Tell me what we're looking at. Orenvoss's fingers danced over the console, his eyes flickering between maps of the solar system and the encrypted data pouring in. They've underestimated us, Oren said, voice thick with disbelief. His usual calm was gone, replaced by something darker. They think they can just waltz in and wipe us out. But they didn't plan for this. The team fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. Their fate, and the fate of the entire planet, was about to shift in a way none of them could have predicted. Javon wasn't just seeing the numbers. He was seeing the Empire's arrogance. A fleet, yes, but a fleet that would soon meet humanity's surprise they had crafted over decades in secret. How long before they reach our orbit? Javon asked, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. He didn't need to ask. He already knew the answer. The readouts on the display confirmed it. They had 2 weeks, but those 2 weeks weren't going to be spent waiting idly. No, humanity was ready. 2 weeks, Oren repeated. But that doesn't mean we just sit and wait for them to come to us. We're going to meet them head on, but we need to play this carefully. They're watching us now. Javon's eyes sharpened. What about our backup systems? The ones we've kept hidden? Isla Sorik, standing at a nearby panel, was already running diagnostics on Earth's clandestine weaponry, their greatest asset. She never looked up from the display, but her voice was a quiet confidence. All systems are online, but there's a catch. Our defenses are scattered, well hidden. On the Moon, Mars, and even Earth itself. They're embedded in places that don't even raise suspicion. If we make the first move too early, we risk exposing them. Javon ran his fingers through his short, graying hair. His thoughts were a whirlwind of strategies, pieces of a puzzle that were still too far apart. The Empire wasn't just any adversary. It was a machine, well-oiled, terrifyingly advanced. But that was where Earth had the advantage. Humanity wasn't a machine. They could think in ways the Empire couldn't even fathom. "You know what needs to be done," Javon said, turning back to his team. "We'll keep our plans quiet for now. Let them come. We'll show them our hand when we're ready." Ayla nodded, her hands moving over the console. "Let them underestimate us. They're going to make that mistake." As the hours stretched, Javon couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the data, it was something visceral. He felt it in the pit of his stomach, a gnawing sensation that wouldn't subside. It wasn't fear. No, fear was for those who didn't know what they were capable of. This was something deeper, an understanding of the enemy, a calculation of their movements, and an awareness that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for everything. Outside the station, the stars seemed to flicker, like distant pinpricks in an endless void. A soft, almost imperceptible change in the air circulated through the station. Not a physical change, but a perceptual one. The faintest, coldest current of tension. The unspoken truth: Earth was no longer at the edge of the map. It had been pulled back into the center of the universe's most dangerous game. Vela Nazra entered the command center with a data pad in hand. She was as composed as ever, her dark eyes flickering over the displays with sharp precision. She was Earth's top intelligence officer, and her job was to see what others couldn't. "Javon," she said, her voice low but urgent, "there's more to this than just their fleet. Their comms are too quiet. They're hiding something." Javon glanced over at her, noting the subtle tension in her posture. She had an unsettling ability to detect things that didn't show up in the data. "Explain." Vela stepped closer, her fingers flying over the data pad. "We intercepted a transmission. It's heavily encrypted, but I've been working on it. They're not just arriving here. They've been tracking Earth for decades, longer than we thought." She paused. "They know us." Javon's gaze narrowed. "How long?" "Long enough to understand our patterns, understand how we fight. This isn't just a conquest. It's personal," Vela said, the words hanging between them like a death sentence. Javon's mind worked faster than ever. "So it's not just about our resources. It's about us." Vela nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of." A cold shiver ran down Javon's spine, but his resolve hardened. "Then we'll have to surprise them. We'll have to show them exactly who they're dealing with." Back on Earth, the days passed with a slow, grinding urgency. Javon's plan was already in motion. Satellites and sensors, hidden in plain sight, were monitoring the Empire's every move. Mars was becoming a critical point of focus. They had prepared the terrain, disguised their weapons, and now they waited. Every sensor, every piece of technology on Earth had been designed for one purpose: to protect humanity. And when the time came, they would show the Empire that Earth wasn't just another conquered world. They were going to make sure the Empire knew the cost of their overconfidence. In the command center, Javon stood still for a moment, watching the laser plasma displays flicker with incoming data. "They're moving faster than we expected," he muttered. "They'll be here in less than 2 weeks, and we're not ready yet." Oren looked up from his console. "Then we need to stop reacting. We need to take control. Start setting the traps now. Let them come to us, and then we'll spring it on them. We'll make them regret every second they've spent thinking Earth was just another world." Javon met Oren's gaze. "Make it happen. But remember, this isn't just a war of weapons. It's a war of minds." As the team moved into action, Javon felt the weight of the future pressing down on him. The Empire had chosen the wrong target. They had thought Earth was weak, isolated, easy to conquer. But they had underestimated the strength of humanity's mind, the power of its resilience to fight back. The battle for survival had already begun, but it was about to become far more than just a fight for survival. In the dark of space, the Empire's fleet moved ever closer, the faint lights of their ships scattering like stardust. They believed they were approaching an easy conquest, but Earth was no longer the distant, fragile world it once was, and Javon knew it was time to turn the tables. As the days passed, the station buzzed with a new kind of energy. The quiet was gone, replaced by the hum of preparation, the promise of something explosive just beyond the horizon. The trap was set, and the Empire would soon learn that Earth had teeth. The weight of the situation hung over the command center, pressing down like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. Javon Myr leaned against a console, his eyes fixed on the laser plasma display that illuminated the darkened room with a sharp, biting light. Every calculation, every scan, was a silent countdown to the moment that would decide Earth's future. The Empire was coming, and humanity was preparing to meet them head-on. His fingers danced over the interface, scrolling through the incoming data. The satellites positioned around the moon were feeding invaluable information, a mix of normal readings and something far more sinister. Javon's stomach twisted as he analyzed the data. There was something unusual in the readings, a faint tremor in the electromagnetic fields, too subtle to detect by the Empire's primitive sensors, but noticeable enough to send a jolt through his spine. The enemy had made the mistake of underestimating them. They thought they could come in and make their demands, but they didn't know Earth was ready. A sudden burst of static from the comms brought Javon back to the present. "Javon, we're locked in. They're close." Isla Sorik's voice rang through his earpiece, calm but laced with a hidden edge of tension. "The perimeter's secure, but we're about to find out if the Empire's intelligence can match their firepower." Javon straightened, his eyes narrowing as the first wave of enemy drones breached the perimeter. They were approaching silently, their cloaking technology masking their presence for the moment. But Earth's sensors, camouflaged as nothing more than failed satellites, were already tracking their every move. "Deploy the drones," Javon ordered, his voice steady, the anticipation in the room palpable. The tactical display flickered as a series of automated defense drones, disguised as debris from old Mars missions, launched silently into the cold vacuum of space. They were Earth's first line of defense, built for this very moment. But Javon knew that the drones alone wouldn't be enough. It was the rest of the plan, the hidden weapons, the ones buried beneath the surface, that would turn the tide in their favor. The ship's crew scrambled to their stations as the laser plasma displays updated in real time, showing the Empire's advancing fleet in tight formation. Isla's fingers hovered over her console as she monitored their trajectory. "They're deploying reconnaissance drones. They don't know we've already seen them. They're making their move now." Javon's mind raced. He couldn't afford any mistakes. This first strike had to send a message, something that would make the Empire second-guess their approach. "Initiate Phase 1, he ordered. The response came swiftly. Oren Voss, the military strategist, tapped a few quick commands into his console. Within moments, the silent landscape of the moon was bathed in a cold glow. Hidden beneath the surface, Earth's weaponry came to life. Dozens of advanced turrets, lasers, and missile systems aimed directly at the incoming drones. Without warning, the first wave of enemy reconnaissance drones was torn apart, their sleek bodies disintegrating into space as Earth's retaliatory firepower made itself known. "First wave neutralized," Oren said, his voice low, almost too calm for the gravity of the situation. "But this is just the beginning." Javon didn't need to ask. The Empire would retaliate quickly, with far more force than their initial foray had shown. "Keep monitoring. We'll need to know their next move before they make it." Outside the command center, the rhythmic pulse of human effort reverberated through the walls, each movement a piece of a carefully crafted plan. It was the feeling of something building to a head, a delicate balance of strategy, intelligence, and firepower. But Javon knew better than to get complacent. Every step of this operation was part of a bigger game. The Empire might have thought they were prepared for anything, but they hadn't seen Earth's full strength. They hadn't seen the war that humanity had been preparing for, in the shadows, for decades. A sudden beep from Vela Nasra's station broke his concentration. The intelligence officer's sharp eyes darted across the incoming data. "They're trying to access our communications," she said, her voice a blend of focused concern and controlled urgency. "They've detected the interference from the drones. They'll start scrambling their comms to counteract." Javon's jaw clenched. "We can't let them get any further. Initiate countermeasures." He turned to Ayla. "You've got the virus in place?" Ayla gave a curt nod, her fingers flying over the display. "It's ready." The Empire's encryption is sophisticated, but not invulnerable. We've developed a back door. Just a small crack, but it's enough. Once it's in, they won't be able to stop it. Javon's eyes burned with determination. The data that Earth had been collecting on the Empire's weaknesses was about to pay off in ways they had never imagined. Send it. Let's make sure they know who they're dealing with. The tension in the command center was palpable as the minutes passed. The data feeds on the laser plasma displays flickered as the virus began to spread through the Empire's communication network. Javon stood motionless, his heart racing as the comms feed showed the Empire's own systems beginning to break down. Earth had just planted a seed of chaos within their ranks, and now it was up to the rest of the plan to finish the job. But just as the first signals of success flickered on the display, a new alarm began to blare, louder and more insistent than before. Javon snapped his head up, his pulse quickening. "What's going on?" Oren's voice was sharp. "They're adapting faster than we thought. The Empire's fleet is shifting tactics. It's too soon for them to respond to the virus, but they're compensating elsewhere. We need to change our approach before they take advantage of this." Javon narrowed his eyes, watching as the Empire's fleet repositioned, the ships shifting into a formation that looked more like an impenetrable wall than an advancing force. His instincts screamed at him. It was a trap. A strategic maneuver designed to take advantage of Earth's weaknesses. "Redirect Phase 2, Javon ordered, his voice cold and commanding. "They're trying to bait us, but we won't fall for it." Vela's fingers flew over her display as she activated the next stage of their defense systems. The cold silence of space seemed to stretch, the seconds dragging on as the battle between preparation and reaction played out in real time. Javon's mind raced ahead, calculating their next move, understanding that what lay ahead wasn't just about fighting. It was about playing the Empire's own game better than they could. In the control room, a strange, electric stillness filled the air. The Empire had just made their move, but Earth was not backing down. No, they were about to show the invaders that Earth wasn't just another target. It was a force to be reckoned with. Javon's fingers tapped against the console in a rhythmic pattern, his mind playing out the strategy in front of him. He knew this fight wasn't just about technology. It was about surviving, about showing the Empire that Earth could endure, outthink, and outmaneuver their best-laid plans. The next strike was coming, and Javon could already feel the weight of it. What would Earth throw at the Empire next? The Empire had underestimated them, and that was going to be their downfall. Javon smiled grimly, knowing the real battle had only just begun. The stage was set, and the Empire would soon realize that Earth had been waiting for them all along. But the question lingered in the back of his mind, gnawing at him. Would it be enough? Would Earth's secret weapons and calculated risks be enough to turn the tide, or had they just stepped into a deeper, more dangerous game? The quiet tension in the command center deepened as the seconds ticked away. Javon's mind was consumed with calculations, the invisible weight of the impending battle pressing in on him. Outside, the Empire's fleet shifted again, their movements more deliberate now. They had realized they were not dealing with an easy target, and their response was swift. The faint crackle of static in Javon's earpiece made his pulse quicken. "Javon, they've adjusted." Ayla's voice cut through the static, low but urgent. "Their formation is different. They've isolated the threat. We're their target now." Javon's eyes narrowed as the laser plasma displays in front of him pulsed with new data. The Empire's fleet was making a calculated move. It was an aggressive shift, a change in strategy that made Javon's gut churn. They had anticipated Earth's hidden weapons, and now they were planning to outmaneuver them. The Empire was adapting faster than he expected, but the game wasn't over yet. "They're isolating the front," Oren Voss said, his voice quiet but sharp. His fingers hovered over the console, his eyes fixed on the readouts. "They're splitting off a contingent to hit our weak points. We need to respond immediately." Javon studied the data, the weight of his decision hanging heavy in the air. There was a beat of silence before he spoke. "We have a few surprises left," he said, his voice steady, but the intensity in his eyes told a different story. Activate Phase 2. We won't give them the satisfaction of an easy fight. Orrin gave a curt nod, his fingers dancing over the interface. The room hummed with activity as the next phase of Earth's defense went live. But Javon couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The Empire's moves were calculated, too precise. They had prepared for the traps he had laid, anticipating Earth's every countermeasure. He wasn't just fighting to survive anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, something personal. Enemy drones are closing in on the surface. Vela Nasra's voice sliced through the tension. She leaned over her display, her brow furrowed. We've just picked up a new signal. It's coming from one of their advanced ships. The transmission is encrypted, but it's different from anything we've seen before. Javon didn't hesitate. Decrypt it. Now we need to know what they're planning. Ayla tapped her console rapidly, sending commands to override the encryption protocols. As the screen flickered and shifted, Javon's eyes stayed fixed on the data. The room fell silent, waiting for the translation to finish. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Finally, the display cleared. The message was short, but it hit Javon like a gut punch. Earth is an anomaly. It will be eradicated. Javon inhaled sharply. They're coming for us with everything they've got. Ayla's voice was calm, but edged with urgency. It's not just a military strike. It's a message. They want to wipe us out, not just conquer. Javon's hands clenched into fists. The Empire had thought Earth was just another weak, isolated world, ripe for the taking. They were wrong. This wasn't just about war. It was about proving humanity's place in the galaxy. And now the full force of the Empire's wrath was about to descend on Earth. The sensors blinked urgently. The Empire had launched an all-out assault. The incoming wave of missiles and drones was massive, a flood of firepower meant to obliterate everything in its path. Javon's mind worked in overdrive, calculating the optimal response, his fingers tapping against the console in sharp, rhythmic bursts. His thoughts were no longer just about tactics. They were about survival. "Brace for impact," he ordered, his voice low, every word carrying the weight of the moment. The rumble beneath their feet told them everything they needed to know. The first volley of missiles had hit. Explosions rippled through the outer atmosphere, the sound distant but earth-shattering, muffled by the vacuum of space. The room jolted with the force of the blast, lights flickering above, and the hum of the station seemed to thrum with the energy of the attack. Orrin stood, his expression grim. "They're hitting our defenses harder than we expected. Our shields are holding, barely." "We need to hold them off long enough for Phase 3, Javon said, his voice sharp. "Prepare the next sequence. The real fight starts now." Outside the station, the Empire's fleet was descending on Earth's moon. Their warships cloaked in darkness, their weapons primed for destruction. The incoming missiles were mere warnings. The true assault would come from the fleets themselves. Javon's strategy had relied on the Empire underestimating Earth's defenses, but the Empire had evolved. They were no longer blind to humanity's capabilities. The war had turned from a battle for survival to a test of endurance. In the command center, the data streams on the laser plasma displays shifted as the incoming waves of firepower collided with Earth's makeshift defenses. Javon's mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but one rose above the rest. Earth couldn't afford to lose. Not now. "We've lost the outer ring of defense," Ayla reported, her voice even but strained. "Their tactics are effective. We're being pushed back." "Not yet," Javon replied, his jaw tight. "They've seen nothing yet." His gaze flickered to the monitor as the enemy's missiles whistled toward Earth's surface. But instead of retreating, Javon knew they had one more chance. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. In the control room, the air felt thick, pressing in on everyone like a vice. The sounds of keystrokes and urgent commands filled the silence between the explosions outside. Javon stood unmoving, calculating their next move in his mind. He couldn't afford a single misstep. Vela's voice broke the tension. "The Empire isn't just attacking our assets. They're disrupting our communications. They've overridden a few of our networks. We won't be able to communicate with some of the satellites for a while." "Then we'll work with what we have," Javon said, turning to face her. "We still have the upper hand. We just need to buy more time. Oren stepped forward. What's the plan? They've adapted to our first move. They'll expect us to fall back. But if we let them think we're retreating, they'll push harder. Javon looked each of them in the eye. We're not retreating. Phase 3 will hit them where they least expect. We've planned for this. They won't see it coming. The cold tension in the room seemed to stretch on endlessly. Javon's mind never stopped, his thoughts sharp and focused as he adjusted the strategy once again. The Empire had pushed hard, but Earth had never been weaker than its enemy. They had fought for this moment, for the chance to fight back. The clock was ticking down, and as Javon watched the Empire's forces grow ever closer, he knew that the next move would change everything. Earth had to hold strong for just a little longer. The final wave of Earth's secret weapon was about to be unleashed. Javon took one last breath, his voice steady as he issued the command that would either break or save them all. Phase 3, now. Javon Myr's eyes locked onto the laser plasma display in front of him, the shifting data flickering like erratic lightning. Every nerve in his body felt taut, coiled in anticipation. The Empire's response had been brutal, but Earth's countermeasures were working. For now. But Javon knew better than to take anything for granted. Their enemies were relentless, and they had underestimated Earth's ability to fight back. He wasn't about to let them do it again. A sudden burst of static in his earpiece broke his concentration. Javon, we've intercepted something. Vela Nazra's voice sounded urgent. They've deployed another wave, heavier, more organized this time. They're targeting our remaining defense systems. Javon's pulse quickened, but his face remained impassive. Where are they hitting? His mind spun with the familiar equations of war, adjusting for the latest movements in real time. Near the outer perimeter, Ayla's voice chimed in, a sharp edge of focus to her words. They've broken through the first line. I'm recalibrating the defensive shields now, but... Not enough time, Javon interrupted, cutting through the mounting tension. We need a distraction, something to pull them off the perimeter long enough for us to reset our defenses. The tension in the room escalated as the seconds bled into one another. Javon's fingers drummed against the console. He wasn't sure how much longer Earth could keep this up. His mind worked furiously, formulating the next move. He had one card left to play, the one they had kept buried for months, hidden beneath layers of secrecy. Prepare the secondary protocols, he ordered. It's time to bring in the last phase. If we don't get their attention now, we'll be fighting with one hand tied behind our backs. Ayla didn't need further instructions. She moved swiftly to execute his command. The cool, sterile air of the command center buzzed with an unspoken urgency, the kind that always preceded the calm before the storm. Javon felt it in the pit of his stomach, the moment before everything changed. His eyes flicked to the heads-up display, watching the flashing data, the calculated movements of Earth's scattered forces. The Empire was still closing in, relentless, unyielding, as they adjusted their tactics with unnerving precision. A sharp beeping pierced the air, signaling a shift in the mission's trajectory. We've got a new problem, Vela said, a note of caution creeping into her voice. Their flagship just broke formation. They're sending it to intercept. Javon stood motionless for a moment. The Empire had anticipated Earth's last move. The flagship's arrival would mean the loss of their remaining cover, the final line between their secret weapons and the Empire's gaze. The quiet rhythm of his heart quickened. This was the turning point. He couldn't afford to hesitate. Target their main engines, Javon ordered, his voice calm but intense, matching the calculated movements of his crew. We'll cripple their flagship's ability to move. If we keep them from reorienting, we might be able to buy some time. The room came alive with the quick flick of fingers over displays. Javon's heart thudded louder in his chest as the tactical units prepared their final strikes. This had to work. The Empire's flagship was more than just a vessel. It was their symbol of superiority. If Earth could neutralize it, they'd break the Empire's confidence, crack the facade of invincibility. Outside, space was a cold, endless expanse, and yet the battlefield had never felt so small. Javon watched the data stream, every missile, every satellite, every shift in energy patterns that marked their movements. The laser plasma displays highlighted the massive form of the flagship, its immense silhouette breaking through the fabric of space like a shadow on a stormy night. But Earth's calculations had been precise. The trap had been set, and now it was time to spring it. The first missile shot out, a streak of cold light slicing through the dark void toward its target. A deep breath filled Javon's lungs as the seconds stretched on. The soundless void outside the station seemed to grow heavier, pressing against him from all sides. Impact in 5, 4 dots, 3 dots. Ayla's voice was steady, but Javon could hear the tension in her words, like a string pulled taut. Target hit. We've disabled their main propulsion systems. A collective breath of relief filled the room, but it was short-lived. The Empire wasn't finished. A sudden surge of energy flashed on the plasma display, showing a burst of power coming from the flagship, a last-ditch effort to retaliate. They were moving their secondary systems into position, readying themselves for Earth's response. "They've got backup weapons," Oren Voss said, his voice cool and analytical, but even he couldn't hide the strain. "We've exposed their engines, but they're compensating with secondary firepower." Javon nodded, eyes scanning the incoming data. "Not for long," he muttered under his breath. "Prepare the next phase. This fight isn't over yet." The intensity in the command center continued to mount as the tactical strikes against the flagship intensified. Javon paced, every decision weighing heavily on his shoulders. The air was thick with the low hiss of commands and murmured strategies. Ayla's fingers danced across her console, her face illuminated by the pale glow of the laser plasma screen. Suddenly, the alert sounded again. The flagship was retaliating, harder, faster, more determined than before. "They've re-engaged their primary cannons," Vela said sharply, "targeting Earth's outer defenses. We can't stop them all." Javon's heart raced. The initial victory had been hard-fought, but now the Empire was growing desperate, and desperation made enemies unpredictable. "We don't have the luxury of time," Javon said, his tone darkening. "We need to force their hand." A pause hung in the air. Every officer in the room held their breath as they awaited the next move. And then it came, an idea that had been lurking beneath the surface of Javon's mind, an option they'd kept in reserve. It was a risk, a gamble, but if they didn't take it, Earth would fall. "Activate the launch sequence," Javon ordered, his voice cold, resolute. "We'll make them think we've got more than they can handle." Outside the station, the stars blinked silently. The Empire's flagship, damaged but still formidable, began to move again, as if it had learned nothing from the attack. But in the darkness, Earth's final weapon was waiting. The quiet hum of the command center intensified as Earth's forces prepared for one last strike, an ambush of their own design. The tension between what was and what could be was thick in the air. Javon knew what this meant. The next move could shift everything. They had exposed the enemy's vulnerabilities. Now it was time to take full advantage. He turned to his team, his eyes sharp with intent. "Get ready. This will either make or break us." The countdown began. Each second stretched longer, pulling them all toward an uncertain future. And as the systems powered up, Javon could feel it in his bones. This was the moment. The Empire had underestimated them, and now Earth would make its final stand. The command center was alive with noise, the steady clicking of keys on consoles, the sharp beeps and hisses of incoming data, and the low rhythmic pulse of communication streams. All of it bled together into a hum of activity. Javon Myr stood at the center of it all, his hands pressed flat against the cold metal surface of the console as he observed the data streaming across the laser plasma displays. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, and yet the silence between each exchange felt deafening. Earth was on the brink, and the next move could tip them over the edge. A sharp alarm blared from one of the displays, a shrill warning that shattered the stillness like glass. "They've launched the second wave." Ayla's voice cut through the tension. Her fingers moved with practiced urgency, tapping commands into the console, her eyes flickering over the incoming data. "It's bigger, faster. They're not taking any chances now." Javon didn't flinch. He had anticipated this, but the urgency in Ayla's tone hit him like a physical blow. The Empire wasn't just here to invade. They were here to annihilate. The message had been clear from the start. Earth was no longer just an afterthought. They were the enemy's final target. "Let them come," Javon murmured to himself, barely audible. The words were more than a response. They were a promise. He didn't look at Ayla as he spoke. He didn't need to. The plan was already in motion. They had set their traps, lured the Empire into their zone of control. Now Earth's final gambit was in play. Oren Voss turned, his face sharp, eyes narrowed as he processed the new data. "The fleet's splitting up. Some of them are headed directly for Earth's defenses." His voice was steady, but his expression betrayed a thread of concern. "They're adapting faster than we expected. If we don't act now, we'll be overwhelmed." Javon's gaze remained fixed on the shifting formations of the Empire's fleet. Every line of code, every sensor ping from their satellites, every movement of Earth's forces, he was watching it all at once, like a symphony playing out in real time. The Empire had underestimated them once, and now they were overcompensating, pushing harder, moving faster. The enemy was predictable in their arrogance, but even the slightest shift in their strategy could mean disaster. "We need to hold the line," Javon finally said, his voice low, but there was no doubt in his tone. "Activate the defensive grid on the surface. Get every asset we've got ready to launch." The room went silent for a split second, as if the gravity of his words had pulled the air out of the room. Ayla's fingers flew over the interface, but there was a brief hesitation in her movement. She knew, just like Javon did, that this wasn't just a matter of defending Earth. It was a matter of survival. There were no more contingencies, no more time to delay. "Phase 4, she confirmed, her voice unwavering as she initiated the command. The air around them seemed to crackle as the lasers powering the surface defenses activated. The station's power grid surged, a pulse of energy that resonated through the walls, vibrating in Javon's bones. Outside, Earth's final defense system began to stir, cloaked in secrecy and ready for its final stand. As the second wave of Imperial ships neared, the tension in the command center was palpable. Vela Nasra, hunched over her console, watched the incoming transmission lines carefully, her fingers tracing along the edges of her display. "They've locked onto our position. They know we've activated our defenses," she said softly, almost to herself, as if piecing the puzzle together in real time. Javon's gaze flicked toward her. "What are they planning?" "They're preparing to launch a full-scale bombardment," Vela replied, her voice tight with concern. "It's not just an attack. They're aiming to cripple us entirely." The words hit Javon like a fist in his gut. Earth had expected a full assault, yes, but this was something different. This was an attempt to destroy them, to leave no trace behind. The Empire wasn't just coming for victory. They were coming to make a statement. "Then we'll make sure they can't do it," Javon muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. His eyes never left the display as the enemy's missiles surged forward, each one representing an unanswered question. But the Empire had one more mistake to make. "Vela, prepare the countermeasures," Javon ordered, his voice more commanding than ever. "We're going to make sure they regret this." His words were sharp, slicing through the room, cutting through the fog of uncertainty. The attack came in waves, a relentless barrage that threatened to tear through Earth's fragile defenses. The missiles were fast, designed to overwhelm, to break apart any attempt at resistance before it could even begin. Javon felt the pulse of each strike, the vibrations traveling through the station as if they were testing the limits of its walls. But then, something changed. The laser plasma displays began to flash, showing something unexpected, a break in the incoming fire, a ripple in the waves of missiles. Javon's heart stopped, his breath caught in his throat. "What happened?" he demanded. Ayla's fingers were a blur, moving with lightning speed across the console as she worked through the data. "Their bombardment, it's failing. The surface defenses are holding." Javon allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction, though the relief was fleeting. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. "Keep the pressure on. We can't afford to give them an opening." The room was silent for a moment. as everyone absorbed the weight of what had just transpired. The Empire's attack had faltered. Earth was still standing, still fighting. But there was no time to revel in the small victories. The Empire would adapt. They always did. "They're reconfiguring," Vela warned, her voice low and urgent. "They're launching their final wave, all concentrated on the planet's surface. This is it, Javon." Javon's gaze remained steady, unblinking, as the data flickered across his mind like a storm. There was no more room for error. "Activate Phase 5, he said, his voice firm as steel. "We end this now." The tension was suffocating. Javon could feel his heart thundering in his chest as the countdown to the Empire's final strike began. Earth's defenses were holding, but for how long? The weight of every decision they had made thus far now rested on this one final push. Outside, the stars were eerily silent, their glow dimmed by the growing storm of chaos that had begun to engulf the battlefield. Every move from the Empire was now countered by Earth's own weapons, and the stakes had never been higher. They were on the precipice, and one wrong move would be enough to send them tumbling into oblivion. "Get ready," Javon said, his voice low, a fire in his eyes. "This is where we either win or lose it all." As the clock ticked down, Javon couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle wasn't over yet. There was more at play here than just a war for Earth. Something deeper, more personal was at stake, and soon the Empire would learn just how far humanity would go to defend its place in the universe. The final phase was in motion, and as the first missile from Earth's surface defenses shot out into the inky blackness of space, the calm after the storm was nothing like peace. It was a taut, vibrating silence, the kind of quiet that filled every corner of the command center and made the air itself feel like it was holding its breath. Javon Myr stood in the middle of the chaos, eyes locked on the laser plasma displays. The remnants of the Empire's fleet, scattered and disorganized, were still there, but something was different. The enemy was no longer pushing forward with the relentless drive they'd started with. Now they were struggling. Now they were exposed. "Do you see that?" Ayla's voice cut through the quiet, tight with both relief and disbelief. She leaned over her console, fingers flicking across the keys. "They're retreating. They've lost formation." Javon's gaze flicked to the screen. It was true. The Empire's once imposing fleet was starting to fracture, their ships breaking off in erratic movements, no longer unified in their objective. The sleek black forms that had once been a symbol of dominance now looked vulnerable, scattered like leaves in the wind. Javon took a slow breath, but there was no time to savor this moment. Not yet. "They're regrouping, Javon." Oren's voice was flat, but the urgency was evident. "But they don't have the coordination they did before. Something's wrong. We've disrupted their communication." Javon's mind raced as he absorbed the data coming through the heads-up displays. The Empire had relied heavily on their centralized command structure. They had placed their trust in one decisive strike, one unified blow that would break Earth's resistance. What they hadn't anticipated was that Earth wasn't simply holding its ground. It was unraveling their command from the inside, piece by piece. "We've crippled their communications. It's not just their fleet, it's their leadership," Javon muttered, his voice low but fierce. "They thought they could win by force. Now they're learning what happens when you underestimate your enemy." Vela Nazra, who had been working tirelessly to monitor the enemy's transmissions, spoke up. Her voice was calm but full of conviction. "We've intercepted one of their internal messages. They're panicking. Their fleet is falling apart. They can't reorganize without proper command." Javon nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her words. The Empire had built their entire strategy on overwhelming force and flawless coordination. The moment that collapsed, they were no longer the unstoppable juggernaut they had been. Now, they were just another enemy fighting for survival, struggling against a force they had not calculated. "Activate the final phase," Javon said, his voice steady but carrying the weight of finality. "We end this now." The tension in the room shifted, like the quiet before a thunderclap. Earth's forces were scattered across the battlefield, each unit hidden, each strike calculated. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for the future. Every tactical decision had brought them to this moment, every strategy now woven into one final, decisive blow. "Prepare the long-range disruptors," Oren said, his voice sharp as he keyed in the commands. "Once we deploy them, they'll be blinded. They won't see us coming." Javon turned toward the tactical display as the data began to flow in. The disruptors would send an electromagnetic pulse through the Empire's fleet, rendering their weapons useless, scrambling their control systems. It would be a crushing blow to their remaining ships, their last line of defense. "This is the turning point," Javon said, more to himself than to anyone else. "If we get this right, they won't recover. If we don't—" His words trailed off. There was no room for failure. They had come too far, seen too much, to let this slip through their fingers now. Vela's hands hovered over her console, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. "They're moving into position," she reported. "Their ships are scattered, but they're closing in on the weak spots. They're trying to regroup, but they're too disorganized to mount a real offense." Javon exhaled sharply. The Empire had underestimated the resolve of Earth's forces. They had assumed that humanity would crumble beneath the weight of their might. But Earth wasn't like the worlds they had conquered before. Earth had fought for centuries, against itself, against nature, and now against the Empire. The mistakes the Empire had made weren't just tactical, they were personal. "They won't have time to rethink their strategy," Javon said. "Fire the disruptors." The command echoed through the room, the pulse of the command center vibrating as the disruptors launched, their trajectories locked onto the Empire's remaining fleet. A silence fell over the room as the missiles crossed the expanse of space. Each second stretched like an eternity. The first impact came with a violent shockwave, a pulse that rattled the walls of the station, sending a tremor through every console. The laser plasma displays flickered as the disruptor hit its target, cascading through the Empire's ships like a ripple through still water. Javon watched as, one by one, the ship's systems began to fail. Lights on the plasma screens turned from red to dim gray as their engines sputtered, their weapon systems rendered useless. "Direct hit," Ayla confirmed, her voice tight with satisfaction. "We've disabled their offensive capability." Javon didn't smile. He didn't need to. He knew this was just the beginning. The Empire's fleet was vulnerable now, but they still had one more thing to deal with: their leadership. Without their command structure, the remaining ships would be little more than sitting targets. And it was time to finish what they had started. The Empire's last defense was crumbling. Javon felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. They had planned for this, prepared for this, but even the best-laid plans could falter. He glanced at Oren, who was now studying the display with a focused intensity that Javon knew all too well. Oren was as much a part of this victory as anyone. His strategies, his tactics, had played a vital role in ensuring that Earth stood strong against the Empire's might. "We have one last chance," Javon said, his eyes scanning the fleet's disarray. "They can't coordinate. They're alone in space. We hit their command ship and we take down the rest." Oren nodded, his face grim. "If we do this, we'll force them into surrender. There won't be a battle left to fight." Javon looked over the readouts. "Then let's end this." The final phase of Earth's strategy went into motion. Javon's team launched the final assault on the Empire's flagship, the heart of their operations. The once mighty ship was now isolated, vulnerable. Earth's forces moved in for the kill, their final push guided by decades of preparation. A collective breath filled the command center as the final missile launched, cutting through the void, leaving a streak of light in its wake. The war had been brutal, each move a gamble, but Javon knew the tide was about to turn. The flagship's shields faltered as the missile breached its core, tearing through the heart of the Empire's leadership. The explosion that followed was unlike anything Javon had seen before. Brilliant, deafening, and final. As the shockwaves rippled across space, the Empire's fleet went dark, their communications severed, their engines still. Earth had won. But the cost of victory was heavy. And as Javon stood there, watching the wreckage of the Empire's command ship drift into the void, he couldn't help but wonder. Was this the end of the Empire, or was it just the beginning of something else? The command center was quiet now. The constant hum of the tactical displays had dimmed. the blaring alarms finally silenced. In the wake of the destruction, there was only the quiet clicking of keys and the soft murmur of the crew as they processed the fallout of the Empire's collapse. Javon Myr stood at the center of it all, still staring at the laser plasma display, but his mind was far from the screen. It wasn't over, not yet. The battle had been fierce, but the war was still being fought. The wreckage of the Empire's fleet floated like a reminder of how far they had come, how much humanity had endured. The last few days felt like a blur, a fever dream of explosions and quiet victories, but now, as the ship's walls finally settled, the reality of the aftermath began to sink in. Earth had won, but victory, Javon knew, had a cost. Isla Sorek was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the weight of the moment. "We did it," she said, a half-smile tugging at her lips, though the exhaustion in her eyes told a different story. "We really did it." Javon nodded, but there was no triumph in his expression, no relief. Only the steady focus of someone who knew that this moment, while monumental, was only one step in a much larger journey. "Yes," he said, his voice low but steady, "we did. But the real question is, what now?" He turned to face the room. The faces of his team all turned toward him. Each of them had fought for this victory. Each of them had made sacrifices, pushing beyond what they thought they could handle. And yet, the enormity of their achievement hung in the air, like an unsolved puzzle. The Empire was broken, but the universe was vast, and the real work had only just begun. Vela Nasra's voice interrupted his thoughts, cutting through the static in the room. "The transmissions are coming in. The fleets, they're regrouping." Her eyes flickered to the screen as more data streamed in, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Not just here, Javon. Everywhere. The Empire might be done, but it's fractured, not gone. There are other factions, others who will try to fill the void." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Javon had known that their victory wasn't going to be as simple as defeating a single enemy. The Empire was powerful, yes, but it wasn't invincible. The moment they cracked its facade, they had exposed the raw, bleeding truth of the galaxy, the oppression, the lies, the power struggles. And now, with the Empire crumbling, the question remained, who would rise to take its place? "Then we rise," Javon replied, his voice gaining strength. "We make sure that no one else can impose their will like they did. We show them what Earth is made of." There was a brief pause. His words seemed to hang in the air, a quiet charge that resonated with each member of the crew. Isla was the first to nod, her expression shifting from exhaustion to something else, something fiercer. "They won't expect it, not from us." Javon turned back to the display, his gaze hardening. The information flowing in was clear, and his mind spun with the possibilities. The Empire had always thought of Earth as nothing more than a small, insignificant world, a blip in the grand scheme of the galaxy. But now that perception had changed. The tide had turned, and it was humanity's time to stand tall. "I've seen what happens when people are given no choice but to submit," Javon said, his voice low and intense. "I've seen the consequences of that kind of power, and I'm not going to let that happen again, not to anyone, not anywhere." Oren Voss looked at him, his face shadowed with the weight of their shared experiences. "You really think we can stop it? The void that the Empire will leave, it's a dangerous one." "I don't think we have a choice," Javon replied. "We've seen how fragile the galaxy's power structures are. One fall, and the rest start crumbling. But we've built something here. We've built a foundation that can't be shaken. Earth won't just survive this, we'll shape the future, not with fear, not with force, but with the truth." The room was still, the only sound the soft clattering of data streams running through their consoles. It was a heavy silence, laden with the gravity of what they were about to do. It wasn't about just winning the war. It was about rebuilding, about taking the galaxy's darkest truths and turning them into a light that could no longer be snuffed out. This victory wasn't just for Earth. It was for everyone who had suffered beneath the Empire's rule. It was for every world, every people who had been forced to submit. "It's our turn to lead," Javon said quietly, the weight of his words settling over the room. "But we do it differently. We do it because we know what it's like to be oppressed. We do it because we understand that strength doesn't come from destruction. It comes from standing together. It comes from lifting each other up." Ayla crossed her arms, her gaze fixed on Javon, her lips twitching with a hint of a smile. "A new beginning. We've been given a chance to change everything." Javon's eyes met hers, and for the first time in days, a quiet determination settled in his chest. "Exactly. But the real work starts now. We've broken the chains. Now we build something that will never be broken." As Javon spoke, the weight of the moment became clear to everyone in the room. They had fought for this. They had bled for it. And now they had the chance to shape something new. A world, a galaxy, where freedom wasn't a privilege, but a right. Vela's fingers hovered over the console one last time, her voice cutting through the quiet. "The remaining factions are still out there, but they're scattered. They're divided. They don't know what to do with their power now." Javon nodded, his eyes hardening with resolve. "And we're going to show them. We're going to show them that Earth stands not just as a survivor of the Empire, but as the future. We lead with truth. We lead with strength. And we lead with something they never understood: hope." The silence in the room wasn't just heavy anymore. It was filled with something else, something powerful. They weren't just survivors. They were the spark. They were the beginning of something new, something that could never be destroyed. As the final transmission came in, marking the collapse of the Empire's final stronghold, Javon stood tall. He had led them to victory, but the real journey had only just begun. The galaxy, fractured and broken, was ripe for change, and Earth would lead it, not with fear or oppression, but with the indomitable spirit that had been forged in the fires of conflict. The galaxy had dismissed Earth, but now it knew better. Humanity wasn't a footnote. It was the turning point. Earth had proven that even the smallest can reshape the stars. The Empire had fallen. Humanity was just getting started.